Have you ever fucked up so monumentally, so completely and utterly, that you accidentally changed the course of human history? Most of us make a mistake at work and, we break the copier. Or we send an email calling our boss a dick to the entire company reply all. But occasionally, a historical fuck-up is so uniquely timed, so perfectly marinated in desperation and sheer incompetence, that it births an empire. Today on Audacious History, we're talking about the most recognizable brand on planet Earth. A beverage so ubiquitous it's recognized by 94% of the global population. I am, of course, talking about Coca-Cola. But we're not talking about Santa Claus and polar bears. We are talking about this magnificent bastard, John Stiff Pemberton, a Civil War veteran, a pharmacist, and a man with a morphine addiction so catastrophic it would make a 1980s rock star weep. This is the story of how a desperate, drug-addled chemist tried to cure his crippling opiate addiction by inventing a cocaine-infused wine, only to get absolutely rat-fucked by the local prohibition laws. It's a story of panic, sweat, terrible medical science, and a lazy assistant who couldn't be bothered to use the right water tap. Grab a drink, preferably carbonated, definitely non-narcotic, because we are diving into the origin of the world's favorite soda. To understand the sheer, unadulterated madness of Coca-Cola's birth, we have to start at the end of the American Civil War. It's April 1865, the Battle of Columbus. John Pemberton is a Confederate cavalryman. He's in the thick of the fighting, trying not to die for a doomed and horrific cause, when a Union cavalryman swings a saber and slices through Pemberton straight across the chest. It is a deep, agonizing, fatal-looking wound. In the 1860s, battlefield medicine was basically just a guy with a dirty saw and a prayer. If you took a saber to the chest, you were probably going to die of an infection that smelled like rotting garbage. But Pemberton didn't die. He was rushed to a field hospital where doctors administered the only reliable trauma treatment they had: morphine. Highly addictive morphine. The doctors pumped him full of this stuff to ease the excruciating pain of having his chest cavity reorganized by Yankee Steel. It worked. Pemberton survived. But there was a massive, life-ruining catch. By the time his wound healed, his brain was completely hijacked. He emerged from the Civil War as one of the hundreds of thousands of veterans suffering from what was known as soldier's disease. That's a polite 19th century euphemism for being hopelessly, mind-numbingly addicted to opiates. Pemberton returns to civilian life in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, before the war, John was actually a highly respected chemist and pharmacist. He wasn't some back-alley quack. He had a legitimate medical degree and a state-of-the-art laboratory. He knew chemistry. But behind closed doors, John was fighting a losing battle. His morphine addiction was destroying him. He was burning through money, his health was failing, and the horrific withdrawals were turning him into a trembling, sweating mess. Pemberton knew better than anyone that morphine would eventually put him in an early grave. He desperately needed a cure. But here's the funny thing about 19th century medicine. Their idea of curing an addiction was usually just hitting you with a completely different, wildly dangerous narcotic. And in the 1880s, there was a trendy new miracle drug hitting the medical scene. A wonder substance that promised to cure everything from fatigue to depression to opiate withdrawal. People, I'm talking about the coca leaf. Yes, my besties, cocaine. Now, John wasn't the first person to realize that cocaine made you feel like a golden god who could wrestle a bear. Over in Europe, a Corsican chemist named Angelo Mariani had already invented a little concoction called Vin Mariani. Vin Mariani was incredibly simple and incredibly effective. It was Bordeaux wine heavily laced with cocaine. That's it. That was the recipe. Booze and blow. It was a massive hit. Popes drank it. Presidents drank it. Queen Victoria allegedly guzzled the stuff. It was the Four Loko of the Victorian era, if Four Loko actually made you want to conquer a small nation instead of just crying in a Taco Bell parking lot. Pemberton, desperate to kick his morphine habit, looked at Vin Mariani and said, "I can do that, but I can make it better." Pemberton retreated into his Atlanta laboratory and went full mad scientist. He didn't just want a cocaine wine, he wanted a brain tonic, a medical marvel. He took the base of sweet wine and packed it with extract of coca leaf. But he didn't stop there. He threw in an African plant called the cola nut. Cola nuts are incredibly bitter, but they are absolutely packed to the gills with caffeine. So now we have alcohol, cocaine, and a massive dose of caffeine. But John was a wild man, so he also threw in damiana, a shrub that was widely believed to be an aphrodisiac. He called his unholy concoction Pemberton's French Wine Coca. And holy shit, did it sell! Pemberton marketed it to the exhausted, the depressed. It was pitched to ladies for hysteria, to businessmen for mental fatigue, and to veterans as a surefire cure for morphine addiction. And of course people felt better when they drank it. They were drinking caffeinated, alcoholic, liquid cocaine. If you gave this to a Victorian housewife who had spent the last 10 years trapped in a whalebone corset, she'd be ready to fight a lion in the town square. For a brief, shining moment, Pemberton was back on top. He was making money. He felt he had finally found his salvation, his ticket out of the morphine hellhole. But then, as always happens when you're having a great time, the government stepped in. The year is 1885, and Fulton County, Georgia is swept up in the fiery, righteous fervor of the temperance movement. Local religious leaders and lawmakers decided that alcohol was the root of all evil. Men were drinking their paychecks away, neglecting their families, and behaving like absolute jackasses. So they pushed through strict local prohibition laws. Come 1886, the sale of alcohol would be outright banned in Atlanta. Let me paint a picture of how wildly backwards this is. The local government looked at John Pemberton's French wine coca, a beverage that contained actual, literal, hard narcotic cocaine, and said, "The cocaine is fine, John, good for the blood, but that splash of Bordeaux wine, that is the devil's urine and it must be stopped." When the news of the impending alcohol ban hit Pemberton's lab, all hell broke loose. We can imagine the scene. It's late at night. The Atlanta heat is suffocating, sticking to the walls like wet wool. The lab smells of alcohol, bitter roots, and desperation. John Pemberton is pacing frantically. His morphine withdrawals are knocking at the door. His hands are shaking, his pupils are dilated, and he is sweating through his shirt. In the corner stands his long-suffering lab assistant, a man named Willis Venable. Willis just wanted a steady paycheck mixing powders, but instead, he's trapped in a room with a tweaking genius whose entire business model is about to be outlawed. "They're banning the wine, Willis! The goddamn wine! Do you understand what this means? It's a pharmaceutical masterpiece! I have synthesized the perfect elixir for the ailing human soul. And these Bible-thumping, fun-hating, puritanical sons of bitches are worried about the grape juice?" "Dr. Pemberton, please. You need to sit down. You're palpitating. If we just substitute the wine with a basic syrup..." "A basic syrup? Willis, look at this sludge. I took out the wine yesterday to see what we had left. Look at it. It's thick. It's brown. It smells like a swamp and it tastes like liquid dirt. The wine was the only thing masking the fact that the cola nuts taste like the inside of a rusted boot. If I sell this to a socialite, she'll vomit on her own shoes. Pemberton was right. Without the sweet wine to cut the intense bitterness of the cola nut and the astringent bite of the coca leaf, the medicine was fundamentally undrinkable. It was a dark, muddy, hyper-sweetened syrup that coated the throat and made you want to gag. So we dilute it, John. We tell the pharmacies to mix it with a glass of cool water when they serve it. We market it as a temperance drink. The intellectual beverage. No alcohol. The church ladies will buy it by the gallon. Water. You want to mix my magnum opus with water. Pemberton runs his shaking hands through his thinning hair, groaning in absolute despair. Fine. But it's not going to work, Willis. Nobody is going to line up at the pharmacy for a glass of sweet brown swamp water. We are ruined. I am ruined. Pemberton was terrified. His golden goose was dead. The prohibition laws were going into effect, and all he had left was a barrel of thick, narcotic molasses that tasted like medicinal ass. He had to pivot, and he had to pivot fast. He shipped the new alcohol-free syrup down the street to Jacob's Pharmacy, one of the biggest soda fountains in Atlanta. He instructed the men working the counters to mix 1 ounce of the thick syrup with 5 ounces of freezing cold water. It was a Hail Mary pass from a dying, addicted man. May 1886, Jacob's Pharmacy. The soda fountain was the social hub of the 19th century American city. It was where you went to gossip, flirt, and drink strange concoctions that ostensibly cured your ailments. Working the soda fountain that fateful morning is none other than Willis Venable himself. Pemberton had essentially rented out the fountain space at Jacob's Pharmacy, and Willis was the guy slinging the drinks. Historical accounts vary on the exact mood Willis Venable was in that morning. Some say he was rushed because the pharmacy was packed. Others suggest he may have been nursing a hell of a hangover. Regardless of his physiological state, what we know for an absolute undeniable fact is that Willis Venable was not paying attention. A customer bellies up to the marble counter. They're complaining of a headache, maybe a little fatigue. They ask for a glass of that new brain tonic Dr. Pemberton has been brewing up. Willis grabs a glass. He pumps 1 ounce of the dark, thick, bittersweet syrup into the bottom. According to Pemberton's strict, frantic instructions, Willis is supposed to reach over to the tap that dispenses still, ice-cold water and dilute the syrup. But Willis, distracted, rushed, or just completely half-assing his job, reaches for the wrong tap. He hits the soda water. Carbonated water back then wasn't something you normally mixed with heavy medical syrups. It was usually flavored lightly with fruit or vanilla. But the fizzy, pressurized water slams into the thick Coca-Cola sludge. It foams. It bubbles. A rich, caramel-colored head foams at the top of the glass. Willis looks at it. He realizes he fucked up. He used the fizzy water instead of the flat water. But he's busy, and honestly, he probably doesn't give a shit. So instead of throwing it out and starting over, he just slides the fizzing glass across the marble counter to the customer. The customer takes a sip. His eyes widen. He doesn't gag. He doesn't complain about the bitter cola nut. He doesn't complain about the thick syrup. The carbonation, the sharp, crisp bite of the bubbles, completely cuts through the cloying thickness of the syrup. The carbonic acid perfectly balances the extreme sweetness and the bitter medicinal tang. The bubbles carry the complex flavors of the vanilla, the citrus oils, the caffeine, and the cocaine directly to the olfactory receptors. It is cold. It is crisp. It is refreshing. And because it's loaded with cocaine and caffeine, within 5 minutes the customer feels like he can sprint to Philadelphia. The customer quickly finishes the glass, slaps a nickel on the counter, and says, "Give me another one of those." Willis Venable tastes it himself. His mind is blown. He immediately sends word back to the Pemberton lab. "John, the water. We were wrong about the water. You have to try this with the bubbles." When Pemberton tasted the carbonated version of his syrup, he knew instantly that they had stumbled onto a gold mine. The temperance movement, the very thing that had ruined his wine-based business, had accidentally forced him to create the most perfectly balanced, highly addictive fountain drink in human history. They didn't have a temperance medicine anymore. They had a delicious recreational beverage. They needed a name. Pemberton's bookkeeper, a man named Frank Robinson, who had excellent penmanship, suggested they name it after its two main narcotic ingredients, the coca leaf and the cola nut. He swapped the K in cola to a C because he thought the two C's would look great in advertising. Frank Robinson drew up the logo in Spencerian script, the exact same logo that is plastered on billions of bottles around the world today. Coca-Cola hit the market in 1886 at 5 cents a glass. It was marketed as delicious and refreshing, a slogan that finally abandoned the heavy medical claims and just leaned into the fact that the drink tasted fucking incredible. But here is where the story takes a dark, heartbreaking turn. You'd think John Pemberton lived happily ever after, swimming in a Scrooge McDuck vault of nickels. But you have to remember why he invented the drink in the first place. He was trying to cure his morphine addiction, and the cocaine didn't cure it. It just meant that he was now addicted to morphine and he was running a massive business while incredibly high on cocaine. Despite the immediate success of Coca-Cola, Pemberton's health was rapidly deteriorating. His addiction was spiraling completely out of control. And as any addict will tell you, maintaining a heavy opiate habit is incredibly expensive. Desperate for cash to feed his morphine habit, Pemberton began selling off pieces of his company. He sold fractions of the Coca-Cola rights to various partners, investors, and businessmen for absolute pennies on the dollar. He was just trying to get enough cash to make it through the week. One aggressive businessman in particular, Asa Griggs Candler, swooped in like a vulture. Candler recognized the monumental potential of the drink, and over the course of a few months, he bought up almost total control of the Coca-Cola formula and brand. John Stith Pemberton, the man who combined the ingredients, the man who suffered through the withdrawals, the man who pivoted when the law tried to shut him down, died in August 1888. He was penniless. He was still hopelessly addicted to morphine. And he had sold the rights to the future of the global beverage industry for roughly $1,750. Asa Candler took Pemberton's accidental fizzy tonic and turned it into an empire. By the early 1900s, Coca-Cola was being sold across the United States. And yes, in 1903, due to growing public panic about narcotics, the company quietly switched to using spent coca leaves, removing the active cocaine but keeping the flavor. So no, your modern Diet Coke won't make your face numb. The legacy of John Pemberton is a masterclass in tragic irony. The man set out to create a serious, life-saving pharmaceutical drug. He wanted to be remembered as a pioneer of medicine. Instead, his local government banned his booze, his lazy assistant hit the wrong water tap, and he accidentally created a sugary, bubbly treat that is currently being served at every McDonald's drive-thru on the planet. He fumbled his way into immortality. Thanks for watching this episode of Audacious History. If you enjoyed watching us unpack the frantic, drug-fueled origins of your favorite soda, do us a massive favor and hit that like button. Got a favorite historical fuck-up you want me to cover next? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, even the ones written by people who clearly haven't had their morning caffeine. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep your history audacious, and for the love of God, always check which tap you're pulling. See you next time.